Everything changed at 3:16 local lunar time. That was when the signal came. It didn't come from space. It didn't come from Earth. It came from beneath. Out on the desolate mining moon of Karakzul, orbiting a dead gas giant in Segmentum Obscurus, an automated data relay registered a frequency spike. Not cosmic radiation, not a beacon. A deliberate, patterned mathematical signal. It echoed in prime numbers, over and over. At first, the lunar outpost engineers thought it was a glitch, corrupted data from the core scans. But they checked again. It wasn't a mistake. The signal was repeating. It was a countdown. For decades, Karakzul had been little more than an afterthought. Just another industrialized rock orbiting an irrelevant world, designated for mining and/or extraction. A skeleton crew operated surface-level logistics. Most of the deeper mining was done by servitors and mechanized drills. The Imperium had charted the moon centuries ago, but never fully surveyed its interior. Some claimed it had once been flagged for exterminatus, then removed from the list. The records were patchy. No one questioned it. Why would they? But the deeper they drilled, the more anomalies they uncovered. Strange crystalline structures that resonated with unnatural energy. Black monoliths with perfectly right angles. Fragments of metal harder than anything the Adeptus Mechanicus could identify. Still, the directive was simple: mine and ship. The tech priests logged the anomalies, sent encrypted reports to Mars, and carried on. Then the countdown began. The signal was faint at first, buried under system chatter. But it grew louder, more frequent, spreading through Vox relays, servolinks, and data tethers. It began to show up in dreams. Yes, dreams. One junior engineer, sleep-deprived and delirious, sketched a diagram in the dust of his quarters, a circular pattern of intersecting rings. When later reviewed, it matched the schematics of a Necron stasis crypt. But no one knew that then. They thought he'd gone mad. That same night, he walked into an excavation shaft without a void suit. His body was never found. As the days passed, minor systems began failing. Power outages, servitor misfires, security turrets locking onto empty hallways, and worst of all, whispers. Not voices, whispers inside machines. Data logs playing back fragments of words no one had spoken. The Auspex logs recorded one phrase repeated over and over. We never slept. You did. There was one incident in the mess hall. A surveyor broke a mirror after claiming he saw a reflection with no source. When restrained, he screamed about metal skeletons with glowing eyes, crawling up from the soil. By day 4, no one was sleeping. That same day, an excavation crew broke through something they called the shell. Not a cavern, not rock, not metal. It was smooth, cold, and curved, like the hull of a buried spacecraft. Jet black, seamless, reflecting nothing. They hadn't found a wall. They'd found a door, and it was alive. When the tech priests approached with auspex and noospheric probes, scanners exploded in a cascade of white noise. One of the priests convulsed violently, blood pouring from his nose and ears. As he died, he mumbled in binary, "It sees us." The countdown accelerated. Tremors worsened. A mining rig vanished into the ground. No bodies, just crushed steel and a single word carved deep into the bulkhead. Silence. On day 6, the servitor stopped mid-task, walked calmly to the communications deck, tore off its own limbs, and used the remaining parts to etch a massive circuit diagram onto the floor. The design resembled a sarcophagus, scrawled beneath it in blood and oil. "We were first. We will be last." They tried to leave. Evac shuttles failed. Long-range Vox turned to static. The Mechanicus declared a data quarantine. No signals in, no signals out. Paranoia turned into hysteria. One officer shot another during a shift change, claiming the victim wasn't blinking anymore. Another barricaded himself inside the sanitation deck and started praying to the Emperor with a knife pressed to his throat. He slid anyway. His final words, "You can't kill what never died." By day 9, the signal was no longer localized. Astropathic relays were going dark across the system. An eerie green aurora spread through the moon's sky. Not light, but distortion. Time felt slower. Some swore they heard chanting echoing through the void. And then silence. Everything stopped. The lights dimmed. The pulse of the shell ceased. No wind. No tremors. No static. And then a sound. A chime. Hollow. Deep. Metallic. It rang once, and the ground cracked open. Green light spilled out. The Necrons had awoken, and the moon known as Karakzul would never see another sunrise. Before the horror, before the signals, and before the blood, Karakzul was just another moon. Unremarkable. Cold. Silent. It orbited a lifeless gas giant named Vornax, forgotten even by most Imperial cartographers. The system itself sat in a poorly mapped region of Segmentum Obscurus, far from trade routes or strategic value. A dead place in a dying galaxy. That made it perfect for mining. The Adeptus Mechanicus had marked it decades ago as a Category 4 resource zone, which meant one thing: strip it, take everything, ask no questions. Report anomalies only if they caused equipment failure. And so they did. The first permanent outpost was established by Muggos Telranox in M41.812. He brought with him 24 tech priests, 300 servitors, and 15,000 tons of automated drills, refinery modules, and prefab housing units. No astropaths. No Sisters of Silence. No protection, just machines, man, and the certainty that no one was watching. The moon's surface was covered in a fine ash-gray powder, ancient volcanic residue from a long-dead atmosphere. Beneath that were dense layers of composite metals, many unfamiliar even to Mechanicus archives. Deep scanning probes failed regularly. Some said the moon was geologically alive. Others said it was haunted. The locals, indentured laborers from a nearby agri-world, called it the Hollow God. They claimed it whispered. Tech priests dismissed it as pre-industrial superstition, but the name stuck. Karakzul's official purpose was promethium extraction and ferromagnetic or refinement. What they didn't say was that almost every deep core expedition ran into obstructions. Vast cavernous voids, symmetrical structures of unknown design, or entire drill heads disappearing into liquid black stone that swallowed energy and gave none back. These were flagged as xenoarchaeological formations of non-actionable concern. The phrase appeared in over 400 internal Mechanicus reports. It meant, do not ask. And so they dug. Despite the anomalies, life on the moon was predictable. Shifts, meals, quotas, repeat. The overseers monitored data. The servitors worked without rest. The machine spirits were satisfied mostly. The atmosphere was kept breathable within the main dome, but oxygen levels would sometimes drop for no reason. Cold drafts moved through sealed halls. No one could find the source. One tech adept joked that the moon was exhaling. No one laughed. The turning point came when they activated drill unit Theta 9, the deepest bore ever attempted on Karakzul. It was designed to reach the absolute core layer, where gravitational anomalies had been detected for decades, but never investigated. Within 72 hours of deployment, the drill encountered a void. Not empty space, but negative space. A complete absence of matter that caused scanner feedback to collapse entirely. Drill Theta 9's telemetry blacked out, then returned, then blacked out again. Then it broadcast a tone, a sharp, pulsing frequency that made flesh crawl and servos seize. The sound was identical to one archived 27,000 years ago in Mechanicus deep vaults. A signal classified under the code name, Tomb Signal Delta. The entry had no source, no author, and one note. Under no circumstance should excavation continue. They continued anyway. Deep beneath Karakzol's crust, a structure began to react. Not move, react. Walls shifted. Geometry rewrote itself. Temperatures changed in impossible ways. Colder closer to the core. Radiation readings reversed polarity. Light itself dimmed, even when artificial. It wasn't just a tomb. It was designed to be unnoticed. Every aspect of it screamed anti-detection. And now it had been detected. Mugos Nox was the first to propose sealing the site. His last recorded transmission was corrupted, but fragments were recovered. It's not metal. It's logic. Physical logic. We're standing on a language. He dissolved into static mid-sentence. His body was found 3 hours later, drained of all blood, but with no wounds. A pattern of circuitry had been burned into the walls around him. No one had a name for it. Weeks passed. Dreams worsened. Machinery began self-replicating without instruction. A servitor constructed a sculpture in Central Plaza, a perfect replica of the moon, cracked open like an egg, with green light pouring out. When asked why, it simply replied, "Because that's what's coming." It then shut down and never reactivated. Despite everything, despite the signals, the warnings, the dead, the Mechanicus escalated operations. A second drill was deployed. It struck metal. The sound echoed through the tunnels like thunder from hell. A single hollow clang. 3 days later, the countdown began. And Karakzol was no longer a moon. It was a warning. At first, Karakzol wasn't meant to host human life. It was designated for remote industry only. No civilians, no settlements, just drones and tech priests maintaining machines that harvested ore and shipped it off-world. But greed has a way of bending rules. A decade into operations, ore output began exceeding expectations. The Administratum saw opportunity. The Munitorum saw logistics potential. Suddenly, there was talk of a permanent colony to stabilize operations and reduce transport costs. And so they built Sublun Settlement 9C, a domed, prefabricated colony dropped straight onto the ash flats, just 30 kilometers from the primary excavation zone. Population, 2,000 souls. Miners, families, children. They called it Hope's Landing. It wasn't hope. It was denial. From the beginning, things were off. Construction was plagued by equipment failures. Hab modules arrived with components inverted or misaligned. Entire boxes of supplies vanished without a trace. Workers joked about the ghost that hates bolts. Then came the cold spots, regions where heat simply failed to hold, rooms that froze overnight despite functional insulation. Sensors read normal, but the cold was real, bone deep, alive. People started complaining of nausea, migraines, and vertigo. A Medicae survey attributed it to stress and low gravity. But one junior doc wrote in her log, "It's not gravity, it's wrongness, like the air's afraid." Then the children started drawing. Not animals, not their families. They drew machines, tall, skeletal figures with glowing green eyes, marching in formation, standing beneath a cracked sky. When asked, one little boy said, "They visit me when I sleep. They say they're waiting." The parents dismissed it. Nightmares, imagination, but the drawings got more detailed. Too detailed. One sketch matched a Necron Gauss flare down to the energy coil components, something no one in that colony could have possibly known. Within a year, 23 people had disappeared without explanation. No signs of struggle, no evidence of breach. They were there one day, gone the next. The administrator marked them as lost to accident or voluntary departure. They even issued fines to surviving relatives for dereliction of duty. But the colony knew. Everyone felt it. Something was wrong beneath their feet. By year 2, the colony began experiencing audio anomalies. Whispers over Vox channels, chants and static, emergency broadcasts from ships that didn't exist. One engineer played back a transmission recorded while fixing a power line. It was distorted but clear enough to make out 3 words. We are memory. Some colonists began forming a cult. They worshipped the machine sleepers, entities they claimed lived beneath the crust and watched humanity through machines. The cult didn't last long. The local arbitrator burned their scriptures and sealed their prayer room. 2 days later, the arbitrator was found dead in his quarters, desiccated like he'd aged 300 years overnight. A single word was etched into his skin. Interfered. Administrative officials tried to impose a comms blackout and increase surveillance. They built stronger shields around the colony dome. More servitors, more weapons, more control. None of it mattered. The ground trembled at night. Lights flickered without cause. One woman swore she saw figures moving inside the walls. Another claimed the shadows spoke in her husband's voice, and he'd died 6 months earlier. Eventually, the colony was declared containable. Resources continued flowing. Reports were silenced. Replacements were sent, but no one stayed long. They either left or disappeared. One day, a supply ship landed. No one met it. The entire colony was empty. Lights still on, meals half-eaten, terminals active, but not a single human soul. On a console in the central control room, a message flashed in green. Do not awaken them. The ship left in silence, and no one ever came back. The moon had always been quiet, until it wasn't. It began with tremors, faint at first, almost imperceptible. They came at odd intervals, not like tectonic activity. These were rhythmic, timed, precise. The Mechanicus logged them as subsurface harmonic anomalies. Miners called them the heartbeat. No one knew what was pulsing. Muggos Vyern, who replaced the late Muggos Nox, insisted on continuing excavations. No confirmed threat, he said, just deeper mysteries. What he didn't tell his staff was that he'd been receiving data packets, untraceable, heavily encrypted, from deep inside the core. Not from a probe, not from a machine, from something else. They were instructions, strings of logic encoded in impossible mathematics, fractal data that twisted the minds of those who tried to interpret it. Several adepts suffered neurological collapse. One tech priest entered a trance and wrote out over 40,000 lines of alien code before dying of total cerebral liquefaction. His final words: "They are older than thought, older than matter, older than time." Then came the lights. Not electrical flickers, not malfunctions, but green illumination, distant, unnatural, blowing up from the mine shafts at night. Dome surveillance caught it once, a slow-moving pulse of green haze rising through a tunnel. The footage was deleted from the archive within 2 hours, replaced with corrupted files. But too many had already seen it, and more would. The servitors began to change next. It was subtle at first, pauses between movements, erratic pathing, momentary delays in routine protocols, then more disturbing anomalies. One servitor stopped during floor sanitation and began chanting, not in low Gothic, not binary. It spoke Necronter. Translated, the phrase was, "Time bends, stone remembers, flesh is obsolete." The next day, 6 servitors activated spontaneously, walked to the edge of a mining pit, and jumped in one by one. No override command worked. When their wreckage was retrieved, they found something buried in one of the craniums. A black oval crystal, still pulsing. No one had ever seen anything like it. The workers began to lose sleep, not from stress, but because the dreams wouldn't let them rest. Identical nightmares, a sky shattered in half, bones wrapped in iron, stars weeping light, and always the moon, splitting open like an egg, birthing something that had no name but infinite memory. Several requested transfers. Some even attempted suicide. One man gouged out his own eyes, screaming, "I can still see them." He was sedated. 2 days later, his cell was found empty, the walls etched in glowing green lines, the same ones from the alien code. By this time, Karakzul was no longer a functional operation. It was a machine of panic. Every soul on the moon either felt hunted or watched. The pulse from below continued. Day and night it hummed. At precisely 3:16 each cycle, every power unit on the moon dipped for exactly 4.2 seconds. Every system, every dome, every engine, every heartbeat, all slowed in unison, then resumed. Mugos Vyre became obsessed. He ordered a final scan, a deep-core seismic ping using an experimental gravity lens. He was warned. He didn't care. The pulse it generated echoed back with impossible detail. There was a structure, not natural, not built by humans, not static, a moving complex, dozens of kilometers wide, shifting, reacting, alive, metal on metal, from beneath the floors, and the dome lights turned green. After the scratching started, the air itself seemed to change. It wasn't just thinner, it tasted old, like dust from 1 billion years ago had risen into the atmosphere. It clung to the lungs, made breathing harder, made thinking harder. Those who stayed awake too long began to hallucinate, shapes moving just outside the range of human sight. Tall, motionless silhouettes standing in corners, gone when lights flicked on. One Vox officer was found curled in a fetal position beside his console, repeating the phrase, "They're under every moon, every single one." He was terminated by order of Mugos, Vyre for spreading xenopsychosis. Then, the tech priest who analyzed the signal died. His head exploded. Literally, there was no warning. Just a pressure spike in his cranial cavity and a detonation like a grenade. The only thing left of him was his bionic hand, which had scratched a single glyph into the floor before the end. A circle, cracked down the center, and below it, 3 vertical lines. Astropaths orbiting in the system began receiving bleed-through, psychic echoes, warnings. Most died instantly. One survived long enough to scrawl the words. The clocks are wrong. Within days, environmental regulators on Karakzul began failing. Oxygen thinned. Water turned to dust. Lights dimmed and stayed dim. The machine spirits weren't angry. They were afraid. One final signal was sent out before total blackout. A warning beacon in binary repeating, "Do not wake the deep." The pulse ceased. The silence that followed was worse. Then came the scratching. Meanwhile, the tech priests became strange, not just in behavior, but in belief. They began to rewire their own augmentations, not for efficiency, not for function, but to listen. They built crude antennae from scrap and embedded them into their skulls, claiming the machine spirits were speaking of a higher signal. Wyatt approved it. He too had changed. Where once he quoted the Omniscia and Martian rites, now he spoke of data without beginning and patterns beyond the stars. He ordered the construction of a subterranean listening array, deeper than any had gone. A heretic act, and yet no one stopped him. Within 48 hours, the array returned a signal. Not sound, not light, but a shape burned into the screen, not transmitted through it. It looked like a symbol, circular, fractured, and pulsing. Every tech priest who viewed it entered a catatonic state within minutes. Their minds locked into a feedback loop of encrypted thought. They neither ate nor moved, but their augmentations remained active, constantly processing the signal. When one was cut open for study, his brain had calcified into a lattice of obsidian crystal, pulsing green. Panic gripped the remaining humans. Some barricaded themselves in oxygen farms. Others fled into the mines, hoping distance would save them. It didn't. The pulses returned, louder, longer, now accompanied by sound. Deep vibrations that shook metal, static that formed syllables. Not words, names. Ancient names. Names not meant to be spoken aloud. Even the servitors stopped functioning. They stood motionless in corridors, facing walls, heads tilted slightly upward, like they were listening to something above the ceiling. One by one, they turned to face the floor, then dropped, dead. All over Karakzul, green began to spread. Not moss, not radiation, but light. It leaked through vents, cracks, keypads, eyes. Anything electronic became a lens, and through every lens, something was looking back. On the 41st day since the first tremor, the final shift report from a surviving officer was logged. She wrote, "I think we dug into a wound in reality. This place was never ours. It was waiting, and now it remembers. This moon isn't part of our galaxy anymore. It belongs to them." The final dome collapsed under its own weight. That night, the pulse ended, the scratching stopped, and Karakzul, once just another mining moon, became silent again. But it was the kind of silence that listened. They called it the event. It was the moment when everything stopped pretending. No more whispers, no more static, no more slow, creeping dread, only truth. It began in the lower shafts, where drill Theta 9 had first struck the tomb's outer shell. Security logs captured the first seismic spike, a tremor that lasted exactly 7 seconds and was recorded across every sensor simultaneously. The tremor wasn't a natural quake. It was a movement. Something deep below had shifted, and not just in position, in purpose. Then came the heat. Karakzul had never experienced measurable internal heat flux. It was cold, dead rock. But suddenly, internal temperatures spiked by 400%. No source, no ignition, just heat, rising from the ground like a fever breaking. Floor panels warped, metal buckled, dust caught fire in corridors. The heat only lasted 8 minutes. Then silence. A Magriel convoy carrying ore was the first to vanish. All 13 cars disappeared mid-transit between dome sectors. No crash, no wreckage, just gone. The only thing left was the final log transmission from the conductor servitor. A presence, not singular, not plural, not defined. We are not permitted. Within the hour, every data screen on the moon went black, then flashed green, then showed a glyph, the same cracked circle that had haunted the tech priests. This time it moved, not as animation, as intention, like something was watching through it. From it, then the machinery began to bleed. Yes, bleed. Fluid lines that had never held organic material began leaking thick. Dark liquid that smelled of ozone and rust. Pipes screamed when ruptured. Lights pulsed in rhythmic patterns, like a heartbeat amplified through the walls. The sound returned. A chime. Just one. Then another. Then many. A choir of metal bells. But no one knew where the sound came from. It wasn't in the air. It was inside their bones. At Dome Sector 6, a mining lift arrived with no passengers, but smeared across the walls were handprints. Not human. Elongated. Metallic. Razor-fingered. The lift log showed no ascent. No request. No source. Just movement. And finally, the dead began to speak. Not the reanimated. Not zombies. Just voices, echoing from rooms where bodies had once lain. Voices of people long gone. Some recognized loved ones. Others heard themselves. One mechanic recorded a message from his late sister, whispering, "They've seen you now. You are remembered." At 3:16, the pulse resumed. But it wasn't beneath the ground anymore. It came from everywhere. From the walls, the lights, the domes, the systems, the sky. Everything vibrated with perfect synchronization. And in that moment, the tomb cracked. A fissure opened on the moon's surface, thousands of meters wide, exposing an abyss of impossible geometry. Not darkness, structure. Greenlit spires, black metal, ancient walkways forming themselves midair. They weren't waking up. They were already awake. And Karakzul was the first to know. Nothing on Karakzul made sense anymore. Time, once the one constant in a cold, calculated operation, had begun to fracture. Clocks desynchronized. Shift cycles ran long or ended early. Servitor logs contained timestamps that hadn't happened yet. Mugos Vyern confirmed the anomalies after reviewing a surveillance file that showed a worker entering a room twice, from opposite directions, simultaneously. Vox records played conversations that no one remembered having. Some hadn't even happened yet. Others repeated endlessly, looping fragments of the same 4 words. They're already here. The sun over Vornax no longer rose or set. The moon's orbit shifted, but no calculations could track it. External sensors showed one set of data, internal timekeepers another. One astropath described the sensation best before his mind ruptured. We are not in a place anymore. We are in a memory pretending to be a moon. Then came the bleeding. Not from wounds. Not from violence. People began to bleed from their eyes, their ears, their fingernails, as if something inside them was being rewritten. A tech adept dissolved mid-prayer into a fine mist, his silhouette lingering for a full second before fading. Others reported flashes, moments where the colony was gone entirely, replaced by infinite corridors of obsidian light and metal statues watching from the walls. They were not hallucinations. They were crossovers. One officer stepped outside to investigate a power relay. He returned 5 seconds later. Only it wasn't 5 seconds. It was 30 years. He was older. His eyes were black. his flesh held tight against metal filaments. He collapsed and died instantly. When they opened his body, his organs were petrified. Inside his stomach was a crystal cube that pulsed in binary. Time is an illusion. We are not. Reality no longer obeyed physics. Rooms expanded and shrank. Doors opened to nowhere. One maintenance tunnel became an endless hall, a single corridor that went on for kilometers. A rescue team entered to retrieve a lost worker. They never came back. 5 weeks later, the team was found walking out of a completely different mine on the opposite side of the moon. They hadn't aged. They hadn't eaten. They were all speaking Necroner. Back at the primary dome, the tech priests stopped speaking entirely. They had wired themselves directly into the power grid, forming a massive living circuit across the floor, pulsing with green light in patterns no human could decode. They weren't transmitting. They were receiving. Time itself cracked open when the tomb fully awakened. An explosion of green lightning shot into the sky, not upward, but outward, piercing the dimension around the moon. Astropaths in nearby sectors dropped dead. Ships in warp transit reported a blink, a loss of 38 seconds in reality, synchronized across thousands of systems. In those 38 seconds, every picked feed across the Imperium that had a view of Kurak-Zul captured the same image. A massive black obelisk rising from the surface. Not built, remembered. The moon was no longer in time. It was outside of it, and inside it, the Necrons had begun their reclamation. Before the fall, before the pulse, and even before the tomb cracked, something had already awoken. Not the Necrons, but what they had once served. The entity within the deepest layer of the tomb wasn't metal. It wasn't even alive in any conventional sense. It was a shard of divinity, a memory of hunger, a Tan. The data logs recovered by inquisitorial agents much later were sparse, fragmented, but a name appeared again and again in corrupted Mechanicus encryption. Sharasu, the breath between stars. It wasn't a name. It was a concept, a god of stillness, of suspension, of pause, the moment before the scream, the space between thought and consequence. And on Kurak-Zul, the god had been buried, dormant, dreaming. When the Necrons began to stir, they did not awaken him. He awakened them. Their resurrection protocols, carefully programmed, eternally delayed, were overruled by a whisper. One so subtle it didn't even travel as sound. It moved through memory, infecting circuits, living in the latency between calculations. One by one, tombs opened. Sarcophagi unlocked themselves with quiet steam and cold green light. The warriors inside didn't march. They waited, listening. The whisper grew louder. People across the moon began to freeze, not out of fear, but in time. They stood still for hours, motionless, eyes wide, frozen mid-step. And when they moved again, they had seen things. One woman wept for 3 days, murmuring. The stars scream, but he tells them to hush. A child born in Dome 3A was recorded humming a sound no one could place. Audio logs of the tune were analyzed by a robed data adept. It matched the energy signature of a Tan feeding cycle. The shard didn't speak like a god. It reflected. It showed people versions of themselves, memories they'd lost, futures that had already failed. One worker slit his throat after seeing a vision of his family, centuries dead, not because he feared death, because he remembered being there when they died, and he'd never left Kurak-Zul. The whisper distorted memory, folded it, wove it into reality. The Necrons were not an invading army. They were conductors, and the song they played was silence. One tech priest broadcast a message before tearing out his own neural lace. We decoded it. The whisper is language. It's not telling us anything. It's waiting for us to understand. Then the shard rose. Not physically. It bloomed in every screen, every mind, every reflection. A shape of pure stillness, ever shifting, never defined. It appeared in glass, in water, in blood, and it watched, not with eyes, with expectation, like it was waiting for the moon to answer back. And the moon did, because it wasn't just a tomb world anymore. It was becoming a temple, and every scream, every death, every slip in time was worship. By now, every dome on Karakzul was failing. Oxygen was depleted in half. Radiation levels surged and fell in waves. Grav plates malfunctioned, making some rooms feel like drowning while others turned to zero-G nightmares, where screams carried forever. But worst of all, they were not alone anymore. It began with one, a figure, tall and inhuman, walking the dust fields near Dome 2. It moved with perfect stillness, not slow, not fast, just inevitable. Its joints clicked in a rhythm that didn't match footsteps. Its eyes, twin points of emerald fire, stared into cameras that weren't on. A Necron warrior, fully risen, fully aware. Security teams were dispatched. None returned. When a scout drone was sent to recover their bodies, it found them still standing, untouched, weapons frozen in mid-aim, eyes wide open, unblinking, like statues or trophies. Then they came in hundreds, marching through tunnels, descending from tombs, rising out of the moon's crust like insects from an eggshell, not rushing, reclaiming. Every inch of the moon that was once human became metal. Steel etched itself across floors. Monoliths erected themselves without sound. Pillars of green light beamed upward into space. One of the surviving tech priests documented terrifying realization. They are not invading. They are returning to what was already theirs. The humans who tried to fight died instantly, but not cleanly. Necron Gauss weapons didn't kill the body. They peeled it away, molecule by molecule, until only dust remained, and silence. Some tried to run. They activated ancient escape craft, launched toward orbit. The Necron interceptors did not chase them. They simply appeared beside them, in flashes of green lightning. The fleeing ships were deleted from existence, not destroyed, but removed. Their coordinates overwritten. One astropath wrote in her final transmission, "We are not at war. We are at the end of memory." Entire sectors of the colony vanished overnight. Not collapsed, not attacked, erased. Buildings replaced with monoliths. Roads turned into data-engraved slabs, pulsing with energy. The moon no longer looked like Karakzul. It looked like something older, something perfect, and yet not finished. The tomb complex kept growing. Deep under the surface, sarcophagi opened in endless rows. Not all contained warriors. Some held other things. Constructs, machines, memories made solid, ideas with claws. And through all of it, the Tan Shard hovered unseen, not directing, not commanding, simply feeding. Every soul who screamed, every mind that broke, every moment someone realized what they were seeing. It fed on all of it, because fear was not a byproduct. It was the purpose. And so the Necrons kept coming, not as an army, but as keepers of something long buried and no longer sleeping. There is a moment in every extinction, the click of inevitability. That was what 316 felt like on the final day of Karakzul. No alarms, no battles, no final stand, just that sound, A click, and then stillness. All across the moon, systems shut down in unison. Not failure, surrender. Lights dimmed. Vox arrays fell silent. Even the Necron weapons paused. Not because they were finished, but because the ritual had completed. The countdown had reached 0. The last recorded human breath on Karak-Zul was a whisper from a child hiding in a coolant duct. "It's not a dream." He said, "It's the start." Outside, the monoliths began to sing. A deep, harmonic vibration that resonated through stone and flesh alike. Not loud, not violent, just endless. And then the skies opened, but not like rain or fire. They split. A wound tore itself into real space above the moon. Not warp, not gravity, something else. Inside was structure, metal planes, towering spires, energy rivers pouring through impossible architecture, a mirror of the tomb beyond the moon, a memory given form, and from within it, they stepped through. Lords, Necron overlords, cryptex, Triarch Praetorians, living artifacts of a civilization that existed before the stars had names. They did not speak. They looked, and reality trembled. The shard of Sharesu descended like a curtain of green light. Not a being, an event. Wherever it passed, things stopped. Chronology shattered. Heat reversed. Concepts like before and after ceased to apply. Time did not end. It was unwritten. All remaining humans dropped dead, not killed, just overwritten. Like a code purged from memory. Nothing left, not even bones. The moon convulsed once, then grew quiet. Later, when an Adeptus Mechanicus recon vessel attempted to scan Karak-Zul, it found only a single reading, a frequency. Calm, repeating. Prime numbers echoed infinitely, and one word in ancient binary. Reclamation successful. In the history of the Imperium, no trace of Karak-Zul would remain. It was not destroyed. It had been remembered and claimed, because the Necrons do not invade. They return. In the cold dark of Segmentum Obscurus, there is a system no longer charted by Imperial maps. The records have been wiped, transit routes rerouted, sectors reclassified, but sometimes Auspex arrays catch a glimpse, just a flicker, of a moon that should not be there. Dead, silent, orbiting a world that emits no light. The moon is black, featureless, but beneath its surface something pulses. The Inquisition has long sealed all information related to Karak-Zul. They deny it ever existed. A few scraps remain, scattered reports, broken transmissions, censored logs. But the name is never mentioned, not even in secret. What we know comes from the ruins of a Mechanicus listening station discovered a century later. In its core cogitator, a dying tech priest had left one message. It was never a mining moon. It was a sarcophagus. And we were the rot inside. There are no life signs on Karak-Zul. No transmissions. No heat signatures. But something is listening. Every time a probe scans the surface, it receives the same signal in return. Time's up. And if you stare at the moon long enough, through the blackness, some say you can see shapes moving just beneath the crust, waiting, watching, not for war, but for the next awakening, because Karak-Zul was just the first. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more Warhammer horror stories, and leave a comment with your favorite Necron moment. And remember, the stars are not empty. They're just waiting for you to forget.